Hi everyone, I'm Suana Sedai from Weaves of the Will, and this is the Weaves of the Wheel of Time read along. Today we're going to be stepping away from Eye of the World and we're going to be having a look at a deleted scene from A Memory of Light. Now, if you haven't finished the book series yet, or you haven't even picked up Memory of Light, I would recommend clicking the Watch Later button and adding this to that list and coming back to us when you're ready. If you are currently on Memory of Light for the first time, this is probably some safe viewing now for you. Today we're going to be looking at this deleted scene. It was written by Brandon Sanderson and it's called River of Souls. Now, River of Souls was published later as a short story in the anthology called Unfettered. If you would like more information about that, if you look in the comments description just below, there will be some links and some information for you. Now, one of the reasons we're having a look at this today and stepping away from Eye of the World is mainly because there's a lot of people in the Weaves of the Wheel community who hadn't actually read this or haven't heard this or have talked about how they've had a lot of difficulty finding a copy for them to actually read. So I thought if we give it a read along, and if there's any discussions that you want to have, pop them below in the comments and we will get to them. If you're interested in joining us on Instagram in our forum chats called The Reading Room, you are more than welcome to come and do that, and you can discuss the books with us there. So let's get started on this deleted scene. It's called River of Souls. So we do have a foreword from the author, Brandon Sanderson, but he does recommend reading it after you've read the chapter River of Souls. So we're going to start with the reading of the book, and then at the end I will finish with the foreword. If you're interested in hearing the foreword first, you can just jump ahead to the end and then come back. Bao slipped into the oneness as he sat with legs crossed, surrounded by darkness. During his youthful studies, he had been required to seek the oneness in the midst of a crashing storm, while being towed on a sled behind a horse, and finally, while enduring the pain of hot coal against his skin. He had once considered that training to be extreme, but life had since required him to find the oneness during war and agony, during tempests and earthquakes. For today, for this moment, a dark, quiet room would do. The oneness was lack of emotion. Bao took all his feelings, all his thoughts, all that he was, and pressed them into a single point of darkness in his mind. That darkness consumed the emotion. He felt nothing. He thought nothing. He did not sense satisfaction at this, for there could be no satisfaction in this state. He was the oneness. That was all. The tent flap lifted, allowing in filtered sunlight. Bao opened his eyes. There was no surprise when he saw Mintel. One could not be surprised in the oneness. A thought did hover on the edge of his consciousness. He thought that this man should have been miles and miles away. How? Bao asked, releasing the oneness. Mintel stepped forward. It had only been 6 months since Bao had seen Mintel, but the old man seemed to have aged a decade. His face was all folds and furrows, like a tablecloth taken in 2 hands and crumpled together. Completely bald, he wore a short beard, all grey. Though he walked with a cane, his steps were sure. That was good to see. Mintel might have grown old, but not frail. I rode the Capricia through the city of dreams, my son, Mintel said, taking Bao by the arm. Dangerous. I could not miss this day. I would not have seen you lose your soul to come to see me. Not just you, Mintel said, smiling, to see the fulfillment of prophecy after all these years, to see the coming of Angorlot, the true destiny. No, I could not risk the city of dreams for my son alone, but to attend the crowning of the wild. I would risk anything. Not a crowning yet, Bao said. Emotions were insignificant. Not unless I survive. True, true. You held the oneness when I arrived? Bao nodded. You came to me knowing the oneness already, Mintel said. Sometimes I wonder if I've taught you anything at all. The bells rang outside, distant. Bao looked towards the tent flaps, outlined faintly with light. It is time. So it is. After years of preparation, it was time. Bao looked at the man who had adopted him. I came here for this, you understand, Bao said. For this only. I did not expect it to take years. Attachments are irrelevant. Only this matters. Mintel's smile broadened, lines spreading from eyes and his mouth. To want, to receive, to understand. It had the way of a quote about it, likely one that had the proverbs of Kong Sidi, the great servant. Mintel was a Brishi, after all. And that means, Bao asked. All men want something, Mintel said. All men receive something. Not all men understand the nature of why they have received. You came to us for one purpose, but it was not the purpose that the grand tapestry planned for you. That is not uncommon. Bao flexed a hand, then pulled off his glove. The back of his hand had been scarred with a terrible burn the shape of a circle, with 3 sinuous hooked knives stabbing out of the centre towards the perimeter, the tips turning until they blended with the line outside. If I survive this day, Bao said, holding up his hand, I will do with my power things some will call evil. Good, evil, Mintel said with a wave of his hand. These words are the words of the Alinka, the outsiders. Our ways are not theirs. Our ways are not yours. We are only concerned with what must be done and what must not be done. As the tapestry unravels, Bao said. As the tapestry unravels, Mintel said. So the lives of men unravel a little each day until we reach our end. You have come to us, as prophecy said. Our lives have been chosen for us up until this moment from time. From today, fate will no longer be decided. We give our lives to you. It was what we were created to do. Since the days of the very first Shabote. Go, my son. Go and be victorious. Bao pulled his glove back on, then strode out into the light. Bao poured his horse to the halt at the lip of Aberward. The massive rent in the ground spread out for what had to be leagues, though the people here did not use that term. It had taken him months to understand their complex measurements of distance, weight, and time. He had to call a member of the Counters Guild any time he wanted to be certain of a calculation. Mintel rode at his side. The ancient man had spent most of the trip with his eyes closed in meditation, as was the way of the Abrishi. No man, not lord, not bandit, not slave, would interrupt an Abrishi in meditation. A man would rather take his own hand off at the wrist than risk the unfavourable fate caused by such an action. As the horses stopped, Mintel's eyes fluttered open. He breathed in deeply, and Bao knew that he was appreciating the grand sight. It was one of the most beautiful in nature. Short kingdom trees lined the edge of the rift, though other places in the inner land were filled with dead trees. Only here, in this sacred place, they grew vibrantly. Their bright green leaves were the food of the silkworm, a symbol of the inner land, as old as the symbol that had been burned into the back of Bao's hand. The trees were in bloom, the blossoms hanging in clusters on short stalks below the leaves. The air smelled sharply of pollen. In front of the trees, the ground fell away at the deep chasm, the strata of rock making stripes on the walls. A stream ran below. Angarala, the river of souls. It was there that Bao hoped to find the object of his long search. Around him, the free moved up to the chasm's lip. That was the name they had taken for themselves. Bao had given the men shirts, and they had ripped them into strips and tied them around elbows and knees. They moved like animals as they reached the chasm, and looked down, not speaking, bare backs to the sky, feet unshod. The tattoos on their backs and shoulders wrapped around their necks, then formed into claws or barbed branches below the chin. Their heads seemed to be held from below by the tattoos. "Where is Schindler?" Mintel asked. "She will come," Bao said. And she did, right on time, as the sun reached its zenith behind the clouds. Bao picked out her crew moving up the sides of the chasm from below. Slender and dark of skin, Schindler wore woodsman clothing, thick boots, a rugged coat. She carried 2 long knives strapped to her back, handles up over the shoulders. Bao had never seen her in a skirt, and he did not care to. She reached the top of the chasm, then bowed to him, not pausing to drink or rest despite the long climb. "The way is prepared." No man entered the shrine, Bao cautioned. None. We only scouted the path for you, Wild. Not wild yet, he said, climbing from his horse. Ha, said one of Schindler's companions. Torn had a wild smile and wore his beard in 2 thick knotted braids, one down from either cheek. You are surely the most humble conquering despot this world has known, Bao. You will execute a man for failing you, but you will not allow us to give you the title you seek. To take the title I do not yet have, Bao said, is a dishonour to it, Torn. I will walk Angrila and enter the Heart Home, where I will face and kill its guardian. Until I return, I am not the Wild. Then what are you? Torn asked. Many things. I shall create for you a title to use until you return. Why, Dane. The term was not lost on Bao. The language they called Ishla, or ancient. It had little left in the common with the old tongue that Bao knew. However, during his time with this people, he had begun to piece it together. Why Dane was a pun on wild ale, or wild. Why meant slayer, and why Dane roughly translated to slayer of boredom. Mintel chuckled at that. Ancient eyes alight. Schindler's smile. No smile? Torn asked, inspecting Bao's face. Not a hint of one? Lord Bao does not laugh, Torn, Schindler said, a possessive hand on Bao's shoulder. His duty is too heavy. Oh, I know, Torn said. That doesn't mean I can't try. Someday I will break that mask of yours, my friend. Someday, Torn laughed, taking a canteen from one of his servants and drinking its contents down. My time has come, Bao said. I will descend. Camp here and wait for my return. The 3 gathered around him, but Bao seized the one power and pointed. Wait, he commanded. They responded only to direct and forceful orders. Like hounds, the feral men pulled away, climbing up onto a nearby incline and huddling down to await his return. Schindler still held his arm. A tiny broken piece of him was fond of her touch and wished for it to linger. That disturbed him. It had been long since he had felt an emotion such as that one. I see trouble in your eyes, she whispered. Walk with me a moment, he said, lending her towards the path down to the chasm. Bao turned his head and saw that Mintel watched them go with a curious yet patient expression. The old man then closed his eyes and entered meditation. The man would meditate until Bao returned, eating nothing, taking only occasional sips of water. Mintel gave no farewell, and Bao had expected none. The old man closed his eyes to Bao, then would open them to the Wild. Come, at long last, into the world. Once they were a short distance away, Bao stopped Schindler with a hand on her shoulder. I know you would come with me, he said to her softly. You cannot. Let me at least walk you to the opening below, she said. I know the path. I must walk it alone, Bao said stern. You know this. If I am to bring your Angor-lot, I must follow the prophecies exactly. He descends alone and dies, returning to us reborn. You will wait. She drew her lips to a line. She did not like being told what to do, but she had given him her oaths. What bothered you above? She asked. Bao turned, looking down the chasm towards the river of souls below. Torn called me friend. Is he not your friend? I do not have friends, Bao said, and I certainly did not come here to find them. I seek the prize and the prize alone. I will have the cup's power, Schindler. Nothing else matters to me. Surely all of you can sense that. I long ago lost the capacity for affection. You say things such as that so often. They are true, he said. Tell me honestly, you cannot look into these eyes of mine and see anything but death and coldness. He turned to her, and she stared into his eyes. No, she said, that's not what I see at all. Bah, he said, pulling away from her. You are fools, all of you. I don't care for your prophecies. I speak the words so I can control you. How can you not see this? You have come to save us, she said. You break us free of fate's chains. You did not know the prophecies when you first came. You had said so yourself. But you fulfilled them anyway, by accident. Releasing the enslaved, declaring all men free, that was an accident? I did it to create chaos, he said, turning. You have brought us unity, she replied. You have brought us glory. The dragon has come, Bao. Every man and woman in this land can feel it. He will try to destroy the world, and only you can stop him. There is a reason you have done what you did. The tapestry? Shall I call it by your word? The pattern? It has brought you, and once you step into that cavern below, we will be freed from fate and made our own people again. Darkness within, Bao thought. She is so earnest. She believes it, and did he? 2 years in this land, he was starting to believe. He had accidentally found this place, the very thing he'd so long sought. The others always hated me, he said to Schindler. They named me Yulika and spat at me. Not you. You followed me from the start. Why? You do not want to know the answer to that, she said, meeting his gaze. It will weigh upon you. How well she knew him. He found himself saying, I will protect this people, if I can. Darkness within. He did believe, only just a little, but he did believe. I know, she whispered. Go, I will wait for you. Bao let his eyes linger on her, hearing Torn's laugh as he told a story above. Then Bao summoned the oneness and stepped down to the path. Bao kicked out the campfire. He had started it with one power, but now in the light of morning, it seemed to be wise to avoid channeling. He did not know what awaited him inside Rai Lair, the heart tomb. The guardian was said to be something ancient, and there were many ancient things that could sense channeling. He continued on his trek. His sleep had come fitfully these 2 nights of his journey. Perhaps he should have travelled directly to the entrance of the cavern, but that would have been cheating. A piece of him laughed at that thought of it so. What care he for such rules? Strangely, he did care, more and more. He wanted to be the wild of these people. They were a means, a tool, but a man could treat his tools well. Too many of Bao's associates would break or cast aside a tool once their interest waned. He stepped up beside the river of souls. It did not look like much, more a stream than a true river, a fast-moving one. The babbling noises it made accompanied him down the long decline, always his companion. At times, its noises sounded like whispers. Perhaps that's where it earned its name. He filled his canteen from it. Only the wild could drink its waters, and he wanted to taste them as soon as he achieved his goal. Eventually, he saw the maw of the heart tomb opening before him. He checked the sun, still early in the day. Could it be done and return in time? By prophecy, he was supposed to return from the pit at sunset on the 3rd day. How would the people react if he fulfilled their prophecies in all other ways, but then failed to do so in time? He arrived at the point where the river descended into the cavern. The stone face of the rock here was worked into the shape of a man and a woman kneeling, heads bowed. And was that the image of a chora tree carved behind them? Time had worn the rock face deeply. He could not make it out for certain. He seized the one power and entered the cavern. Amazingly, the inside was overgrown with foliage. Ferns and saplings lined the river as it ran into the darkness. Bao frowned, then spun a web to create light for himself. Better to risk a small amount of channeling than to continue forward in the dark. He anticipated the plants vanishing as he went deeper, but they did not. Against all logic, they continued. They bloomed, though the land above was in the great Lord's grip. So Bao thought, walking deeper, the tomb's guardian is one of the Nim? He had not expected this. One of the vines at his feet moved. Bao channeled, releasing a blast of fire at the vine. The fire hit, but it had unexpected effect. Where the web touched the vine, more sprouted out. the room started to shake. Ahead of him, the darkness trembled, and his light shone in the interior of a horrible maw that stretched from floor to ceiling. Needle-sharp teeth stood in array all the way down its greenish throat. What looked like insectile arms broke up through the twisting plants, long and slender, reaching for him. Bao cursed, unsheathing his sword. During these last 2 years, he had honed his skill back to top form, and he now considered himself the equal of any man. As those arms came for him, he hacked and sliced, weaving between them the ancient sword forms. He separated the insectile arms at the joints, leaving them twitching on the ground. He now knew what he faced. Somehow, a juvenile Jamara must have crawled into this cavern and gone through its pupation and transformation. The resulting shadow spawn was too large to squeeze back out. He saw only its mouth and some of its tendrils and spine. Jamara strengthened when the one power was used against them. Agonor, I hope you burn wherever you are, Bao thought. He had always hated these creatures. He snarled and charged the beast. As he ran, he used weaves to lift chunks of rock up into the air, then burned them molten in the blink of an eye and sprayed the Jamara's maw with melted rock. The thing screamed, the rock trembling as the creature pulled away at the end of the tunnel, revealing that it crouched in an enormous cavern. Its mouth had been pressed against the tunnel's entrance near the ceiling of the cavern to devour anything that tried to enter the cave. Bao's foot hit the lip of the rock at the end of the tunnel, and he threw himself out of the cavern, using a blast of air to hurl himself forward. The enormous Jamara reached beneath him, the vines proving themselves tentacles that surrounded its mouth, the insectile arms, the spines that grew from its maw. It was easily 100 feet long, pushed up inside the cavern, its enormous clawed legs clinging to the rock. Bao raised his sword and dropped through the air towards the thing. Bao hurled himself to his feet, covered in blood from the Jamarani. Its heart continued to thump, its body splayed open in places, crushed by rocks in others. Bao stumbled, then retrieved his sword from the rocks where he dropped it near the stream that ran through the cave. Behind him, the beast's heart finally stilled. Bao leaned against a rock, ignoring his bruises and cuts. Darkness within, the thing that nearly had him. He hated the monsters he could not fight directly by channeling. Bao was convinced that Agonor had created them, not to be part of the Shadow's army, but because of a twisted desire to see how terrible a beast he could make. Bao summoned light. The cup had better be in there. If it was not, he crossed ground overgrown with plants. Between them peeked the bones of fallen heroes who had tried to best the cavern's champion. A Jamara was nearly immortal unless slain. They could live for millennia in hibernation, only eating when something touched one of their spines or tentacles. Bao shook his head, thinking of how easily these heroes must have fallen, even with the one power, even with centuries of training at the sword. He had nearly become another Mill, and he had fought Jamara before. He knew where to strike. Sword out, Bao reached for the other side of the cavern. Here, upon a natural stone dais, he found the plants grown together into what seemed a kind of face or head. So I was right, he said, kneeling beside the face. I thought the Nim had all died. I am not of the Nim, a face said slowly. Eyes closed. Not any longer. Have you come to give me rest, traveller? Sleep, Bao said, channeling fire and burning away the creature. Your service is at an end. The plants on the dais withered, then shriveled, drawing back. Upon the dais, the withdrawing plants revealed an object of gold. Bao could only see why the people of this land had called it a cup, though it was not truly one. He had spent 2 years seeking it, slowly teasing its location from old accounts, myths and stories. He had picked it up, reverent. A short time later, he left the cavern and stepped into Angarala, the river of souls, to wash off the blood of fallen guardian and drink deeply from the cold water. That done, short distance below the end, the metal splayed out into a disc shape. He took the cup and slid it down onto the rod, the tube locking into place. How enraged he had been when he found the rod, thinking his quest done, only to find that the sa'angreal had been separated into 2 pieces. Now they were whole again. He took a deep breath, then channeled through the rod. The one plower rushed into him, flooding him. Bao cast his head back, drinking it in, and laughed. Laughter. How long it had been since he had laughed. This land, these experiences, had brought him mirth back to him. Somehow, he exulted in the power. What he held was no cup, but the second most powerful sa'angreal ever created for a man to use. Digit, known simply as the scepter during his time, had been so powerful that it had been kept locked away during the War of Power. This was a grand weapon, greater than Kalendor. Holding it, Bao felt powerful, invincible. He found himself running back up along the river and did not grow fatigued. He ran through the rest of the day. The hours passed as if in blink of an eye. At sunset, he burst up the last few feet of the trail, bearing his prize. He raised it up high over his head, striding to where he had left Schindler. She waited there still, sleeping in the very spot where he had left her. She rose, then immediately went to one kneel before him. The freed scrambled down from their hillside above. He did not fail to notice that the female Ayad, dressed in black robes with white tassels, had arrived to watch for him. 200 of them waited with the gathered nobility that Bao had appointed. In a wave, they fell to their knees, as Schindler had, leaving only Mintel, who sat at the top of the path, with legs crossed as he meditated. "Mintel," Bao announced, walking up to Schindler and reaching down to her shoulder. "Open your eyes to Angkor Lot. The day has come. At long last, I name myself the Wild. Your dragon slayer has come." The people began to cheer him, and Schindler looked up. "You smile," she whispered. "Yes." "You have accepted it?" she asked. "Your role among us?" "Yes." He noticed a tear roll down her cheek, and she bowed her head again. He had come among them as a stranger, and oh, what power he had found, far more than he had ever anticipated. The scepter was merely a beginning. Mintel cried out, standing, eyes opening, "Hail the Wild, hail him and bow. He who shall save us from the dragon, who shall prevent the death of the land and bring us to glory. Hail Bao, hail our king." The cries of the people rose to the heavens above. Bao drew in power thirstily and fully embraced what he had become. 2 years ago, he had started on this course when he had decided to impersonate a slave among the Shaharans. Now had come the revolution, which he had led almost by accident. So that was River of Souls by Brandon Sanderson, and I'm going to read the foreword on that now for anyone who's interested in a little bit of background knowledge about the deleted scene. So Brandon Sanderson says, "This is a deleted sequence from the 14th and final Wheel of Time book, A Memory of Light. As such, it contains some minor interior spoilers for that book, and it might not make a ton of sense to you if you haven't read the Wheel of Time. However, if you have read the Wheel of Time, particularly the final book, I suggest that you read this sequence now and go no further in the introduction. The commentary here will be more meaningful to you if you have read the sequence first. I pitched this series of scenes to Team Jordan with the knowledge that the scenes were on shaky ground from the start. We knew Demandred was in Shahara, and we knew some of what he had been up to. I wanted to show a glimpse of this. However, Robert Jordan, in interviews, had said that the stories were never going to show Shahara. at least not in any significant way. I felt that he hadn't ruled out the possibility of a glimpse of Shahara. Only he had implied that nothing major would happen there on screen. Team Jordan agreed, and I set to work writing these scenes. My goal was to show a different side of one of the Forsaken. Demandred had been building himself up in Shahara for months and months, overthrowing the government. Grendor helped with that unwittingly, and securing his place as a figure of prophecy and power. He had his own story, which could have been filled on the pages of his own Wheel of Time-like series. He had allies and enemies, companions who had been with him for years, much as Rand, Egwene and company had found during their adventures in the West. My goal was to invoke in this a few brief scenes, at first not letting you know who this Bao was. I wanted to present him sympathetically, at least as sympathetically as a man like him could be presented. It would only be at the end of the sequence that the reader realised that Bao was indeed Demandred, and that everything he was doing here was in preparation for destroying the heroes. It was also important to me that we see Demandred for what he is, an incredibly capable man with a single overriding flaw. Everything about him, including his ability to feel affection, is tainted by his supreme hatred of Lews Therin. The narrative was to hint that it had never had to be that way. It could have been made different. He could have made different choices. Of all the Forsaken, I find Demandred the most tragic. The sequence accomplished these goals, but it did so too well. In threading this sequence into the rest of Memory of Light, we found that the Demandred scenes were distracting. The world building required to make Shahara distinctive felt out of place in the last book, where the narrative needed to be focused on tying up loose threads rather than introducing a multitude of new questions. Harriet, Robert Jordan's widow, and editor of every Wheel of Time book, felt that the scene's evocation of an entire untold series of books was too overwhelming. It didn't feel like the Wheel of Time. If this had been book 8, it would have been wonderful. The scenes could add variety to a series. In book 14, however, they offered a taste of something that would never be sated, and served only to make promises we could not fulfill. My biggest worry in cutting these sequences, that was Demandred's arrival late in the book would feel abrupt. However, test readers didn't feel this way. Demandred as a character had been a proverbial gun on the mantle long enough that everyone was waiting for him to show up. His arrival felt dynamic to them rather than unexplained, so in the end we left these scenes on the cutting room floor. I'm quite fond of them. I do consider the general outline of events within to be canon. However, the specifics of world building are not canon. We cut these scenes before Team Jordan's Maria Simmons, Queen of Continuity, had a chance to go over them with her fine-tooth comb. I hope you enjoy this last taste of Wheel of Time storytelling. Thank you for reading, Brandon Sanderson. So that was River of Souls by Brandon Sanderson. That's the deleted scene from the last book from Wheel of Time, A Memory of Light. I hope you enjoyed my read along. I hope the pronunciations weren't too far off of what you imagine them to be. Obviously, Brandon says he considers it canon, but it didn't actually quite make the canon officially. So there aren't really any proper pronunciations for a lot of these names and words that we are using from the language of Shahara. It could be a little bit off. I apologise. Most of my pronunciations are off, and I'm not changing them anytime soon, I'm sure. So I hope you enjoyed the read along. If you want to open any discussions about this deleted scene, drop your comments below and we will get to answering them. If we have enough comments, what we will do is we will take it and make a little show on Water of Shade, which is our new Wheel of Time talk show brought to you by Reeves of the Wheel. Hopefully myself and May will be able to sort of dissect it a little bit further. If you want to come and chat with other Wheel of Time fans from around the world. We are on Instagram. We have open chat rooms on Instagram that everyone is welcome to join. So if you want to come and converse with us, and if you want to have some discussions about this chapter, you are more than welcome. You can find me at Weaves of the Will, all one word, on Instagram. You can also find me at the Yellow Ajar, which is again all one word, and I will happily get you added to those groups. So thanks very much for watching, and please like and subscribe and give us lots of support. Thank you very much. Bye.